This fascinating building here is the Air Forces Memorial, also known as the Runnymede Memorial, and it's located in Englefield Green, close to the town of Egham, Surrey, England. Its purpose is to honour 20,456 members of the British Empire's Air Forces who died during air and other operations throughout World War II. Now, many of those listed were lost without trace, and none of those have a grave anywhere in the world. These stone walls here bear the name of each of these personnel, and each one, of course, will have their own story to tell. This video, however, will look at the life in detail of just one of these names. A little known but extremely brave and daring young woman who operated in France during World War II as a wireless operator working for the Special Operations Executive, Yolande Beekman. Here on panel 243 is Yolande's name, however her family name of Unternehrer has been used instead. Yolande was born Yolande Elsa Maria Unternehrer on October 28, 1911, in Paris. Despite having Swiss ancestry, she spent much of her childhood in France and relocated to London when she was a teenager. She initially worked for her mother as a dressmaker in Camden Town and Highgate. She led a joyful but sheltered life. After the start of war, she enlisted in the WAF, that being the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, on a low rank. However, her language abilities, she spoke French, German and some Italian, were enough to bring her to the attention of the Special Operations Executive, French or F Section, who interviewed her in November 1942. Now, to get a good grasp of Yolande's life and work for the SOE, we must first understand what the SOE was and how it operated. In June 1940, the Low Countries and France were overwhelmed by the German blitzkrieg and fell to Hitler. Germany now controlled much of Western Europe whilst Great Britain stood alone, and this remained the case for a while. To counter the German threat, a number of initiatives were produced with an aim of taking the battle to Germany both directly and also indirectly. One of these initiatives was to create havoc behind the German lines.
The chorus of their squeaky horns was music to my ear. The last time I saw Paris, her heart was warm and gay, no matter how they changed her.
A new volunteer army called the Special Operations Executive, SOE, was formed in June 1940 to carry out a clandestine war. Its agents were primarily responsible for a sabotage and subversion campaign carried out behind enemy lines. Prime Minister Winston Churchill memorably commanded them to light Europe ablaze, and thus was a very strong backer of the organisation. Brigadier Colin Gubbins, a commando officer, served as the SOE's Director of Operations. He developed an interest in irregular warfare while serving in the Irish War of Independence. A sabotage team was also being planned by Gubbins to operate behind enemy lines in the event of a German invasion of Britain. The SOE's senior recruiting officer was Selwyn Jepson, who was responsible for recruiting women for the SOE. This was done in spite of fierce opposition. It was Jepson's view that women were considerably better than men for the work due to their greater capacity for cool and lonely courage. Jepson stated in an interview for the Imperial War Museum that men usually want a mate with them, and that men don't work alone, their lives tend to be always in company with other men. It was Winston Churchill who gave Jepson the go-ahead. Churchill asked Jepson if he was planning to use women in the field, and Jepson responded, "Yes, don't you think it's a very sensible thing to do?" Churchill replied, "Yes, good luck to you." Jepson took that as his authority to proceed. In addition to blowing up industries, railways and bridges, Gubbins encouraged uprisings and guerrilla warfare in nations that Great Britain's enemies had seized. In order to collaborate with resistance movements, SOE agents were dropped into occupied Europe and the Far East after completing a demanding training program. Some joined immediately from civilian life, while others were actual serving troops, frequently with commando training experience. Some of the women that signed up had to conceal their covert activities by joining the First Aid Nursing Yeomanry as a front. During the Second World War, only SOE women were allowed to serve in combat roles. In contrast to other special forces, SOE agents typically wore civilian clothes. As a result, if they were discovered, they could anticipate being shot as spies. They also ran the risk of being tortured by German Gestapo agents, who were known to be extremely ruthless in their approach to getting information. Women SOE operatives were not exempt from this policy. It is also worth noting that an average life expectancy of an SOE wireless operator operating in France was just 6 weeks. The SOE was viewed suspiciously by the Secret Intelligence Service, SIS, today known as MI6. The organisation's leader, Sir Stuart Menzies, claimed SOE were amateur, dangerous and bogus. He exerted intense political pressure from within on the newly formed organisation. By blowing up factories and bridges, SOE risked interfering with the intelligence gathering efforts of SIS's operatives. In the same way, Bomber Command disliked having to loan their aircraft for SOE missions. Bombarding Germany to destruction was their preferred method of ending the war. But because of Churchill's support, SOE, like many other special forces throughout the war, survived and thrived. Yolande joined an SOE mixed training group of 10 recruits 3 months after her interview. The course was held at Wanborough Manor. Only 4 people in total who were on the course would survive the war, and only one of the 3 other ladies, who were Noor Inayat Khan, Yvonne Cornu and Cecily Lefort. During training, Yolande was described as an outstanding wife for an unimaginative man in the initial reports. From the preliminary course at Wanborough Manor, which noted how she repaired the man's socks, her modest demeanour, however, concealed other qualities. She rapidly came across as confident and determined, as well as cheerful, driven by the good of the course and devotion to duty. Although she moved through SOE's agent finishing school in Bewley at a cautious trot rather than a gallop, she nonetheless demonstrated her dependability and practicality as a student who was full of common sense and resource. Yolande started her training as a wireless operator in August 1943 at Thame Park, situated in Oxfordshire. She found the coding and transmitting work to be challenging, but she quickly earned everyone's respect and affection, especially that of Yolande Beekman, a recruit for SOE's Dutch unit who fell in love with her. Only a brief engagement was possible due to their busy schedules, and they wed in London at the end of the same month. Yolande's first mission was being planned even while they were celebrating. Gustav Bieler, also known as Guy, was chosen to lead a new team that would be based in Saint-Quentin, which is situated in northern France. There, a group of patriots who were known to the SOE were anxious for a liaison with London. Saint-Quentin seemed likely at the time to develop into a key town for German canal and railway communications. The team's makeup was the next matter to be decided. Bieler had such a remarkable personality that it was challenging to match him with a compatible partner. After giving it some deliberation, they chose Yolande, a young woman of Swiss descent sent by the WAF. Her French was flawless, and the hint of a Swiss accent served as a benefit by detracting from her very quintessential English appearance. Yolande was quite reserved but affable, and her unflappable cheerfulness and sense of humour were a huge benefit. With Beeler, she instantly forged an easy connection that boded well for their future collaboration. Early in September, she bid her husband farewell at King's Cross Station for what would turn out to be the last time. Yolande reported to Baker Street on September the 17th, 1943, and was then transported to RAF Tangmere to board a twin Lysander flight with 3 other F-Section agents. Just before 1 in the morning, both planes safely landed on French territory in a field outside of Angers in northwest France. When the morning curfew was broken, Henry Dericourt, the SOE reception organiser, gave them each a bicycle, which Yolande reportedly had problems riding. He then led them into the city. She stumbled along the way at the first sight of a German patrol, but thankfully they made it to the station without incident and separated before boarding the first train to Paris. This group was fortunate since they were unaware that Henry Dericourt had been assisting the Gestapo for some time, and other agents who arrived at his landing areas were followed to their safe houses. They briefly reunited with Henry Dericourt the following day at the Café Monte Carlo close to the Arc de Triomphe before parting. 2 agents would travel to the south, 1 to the east, and Yolande, now operating under the guise of Yvonne de Chauvigny, would relocate to the north to work as a wireless operator for the musician circuit in Saint-Quentin-Picardy. Since the beginning, Musician had to rely on communication using other SOE circuits, primarily through connections with Francis Sutill's Prosper circuit, which had collapsed that summer. It desperately needed a reliable connection to London since it had received new orders to get ready for D-Day. Gustav, or Guy Beeler, was the facilitator of the musician circuit. He was another agent of Swiss ancestry. Prior to enlisting in the Canadian Army, he managed Sun Life in Montreal. He was a stocky man in his late 30s, but possessed various abilities such as great self-awareness, the ability to discern character, and the avoidance of taking unnecessary risks. These he attributed to keeping him alive for nearly a year in one of France's most dangerous regions, and all done without a wireless operator. He built a network of local resistors and high-ranking connections in the French railways, the SNCF, who organised frequent train derailments between Saint-Quentin and Lille. He achieved all this despite suffering from a severe spinal injury acquired during a difficult parachute descent. Saint-Quentin was a significant industrial hub that produced both machinery and textiles. Additionally, it provided vital communication channels via its canal and railroads, facilitating the movement of German vehicles, cargo and supplies across northern France. This meant that the area was heavily guarded and that, in contrast to businesses located in rural areas, it was challenging to find suitable accommodation. Yolande's first place of lodging was with a seasoned member of the resistance and was also a schoolmistress, but this could only be for a short time. Beginning in October 1943, she moved into the home of Camille Boury, who resided on the corner of Rue Baudelaire and worked at the Pharmacie Courtille. Yolande needed a place to transmit from, and Odette Gobou offered her the drafty attic in her house. Odette Gobou was a co-worker of Boury's at the pharmacy. She started paying discreet visits to Gobou's home in Rue de la Fère, entering with her own key during the day, setting up her equipment on a tiny table and letting the long aerial out of the window above. When Yolande was waiting for the next transmission, Gobou recalls her frequently reading a book while laying on the bed, seemingly unconcerned about the potential of being arrested. She worked alone, which was truly a sign of her courage, as many other operators took the precaution of travelling with one or more bodyguards. One of musician's lieutenants was Eugenie Cordelet, and she later referred to both Biela and Yolande as being both of the finest stuff imaginable. But she believed that Yolande's training should have made her far more aware of security and the dangers that were never far away. Yolande communicated using a pre-planned schedule or SCED, transmitting signals at certain times and frequencies 3 times per week, as directed by London. In France, SOE wireless operators followed this standard procedure. However, the majority would try to install multiple sets at various safe locations and rotate between them to avoid discovery. After Yolande was sent to France, some safety improvements such as more flexible transmission SCEDs were implemented. It's unclear why Yolande didn't use these additional hideouts, since transmitting from one static radio post hugely increased the likelihood of being found by a German direction finding team, which were known to roam the streets of major towns and cities across the country. It may have been that it was just too difficult to source any suitable locations in such a densely populated area, or of course, she may have suffered technical issues with the wireless sets that were available at the time. While Musician focused on growing and establishing itself, the neighbouring Farmer circuit, directed by Michael Trotterbas, who had parachuted in with Biela the year before, seized every chance to undermine or kill the enemy. On November the 28th, Trotterbas was killed in a gunfight in Lille. On December the 2nd, Yolande informed London of Trotterbas's death. Biela was now under considerably greater pressure because he had to cover both circuits for London. In spite of his deteriorating health, he persisted in receiving parachute drops and managed to successfully damage 10 locomotives in November, and before Christmas another 11. Obviously, this now only resulted in the Gestapo being even more determined to bring a halt to his activities. By the year's end, their combined efforts had pushed Musician to the verge of being prepared for D-Day. Groups were set up to attack the local rail networks at 25 sites, while others would ambush German communications throughout the area and cut telephone cables to Paris. However, this raised the obvious question: would they live long enough to carry out their plans? The network had benefited much from Yolande's unwavering and daring approach, but her work was getting riskier by the day. German radio signal interception had advanced to a very high level at this point, and the regularity of her transmissions was assisting her pursuers in eventually identifying the source. At the Bury's home on Christmas Eve, Yolande and Biela tried their best to be festive whilst listening to the BBC. She communicated with London on Christmas Day as normal, but the following week a direction-finding van was spotted driving past the house, a foreboding indicator that the net was drawing closer. She relocated her set to the Bury residence where she was still residing, but on January the 12th, Camille Bury observed a man strolling down the street wearing headphones and with his collar raised. It became obvious that the Germans had traced Yolande's radio signal to their neighbourhood. Quickly, she packed up her wireless set and relocated once more, this time to the Café Moulin Brûlé, a solitary haven on the northern side of the canal at the northeastern part of the city. She could rely on the cafe proprietors to provide her with a place to stay for the night after her narrow escape. The Gestapo were now prepared to make their arrest when Biela arrived at the cafe the following day to discuss their future steps. 2 men then entered the cafe carrying revolvers, and everyone inside was then detained. Before the week was out, there had been over 50 arrests, and the network had quickly fallen apart. Paul Tessier, codenamed Theodore, who had just been dropped in to serve as Biela's aide, was among those who were captured. Despite breaking his hand during his interrogation, he later managed to flee and was later killed in a firefight in August 1944, just 1 day after Paris was liberated. After receiving protection from Biela's network in Saint-Quentin, fugitive RAF pilot Lieutenant Stavely subsequently reported that Yolande and Biela had eventually been found by a radio direction finding team after she had been transmitting in the cafe. Tessier corroborated this assertion by stating that Biela had informed him that they'd DF'd us. Odette Gabou, however, was certain that the arrests were the result of denunciation, but no perpetrators were named. Gabou had mentioned a number of potential sources, including a police officer and Bourie's previous lover, in a report produced in 1945. It's easy to see how the musician circuit could never have eluded the Gestapo indefinitely whilst conducting activities near Saint-Quentin, even if collaboration was their undoing. According to Tessier's report, Biela told him that the network had become too big and that he had become too ill to continue for long, even before their capture. Yolande was led back to Courtille's pharmacy a few days following the arrests. She had definitely been severely beaten because of severe swelling to her face. Tessier saw her when he was being held and deduced that her interrogators had frightened the poor girl out of her wits. When the Germans questioned Courtille about the whereabouts of Yolande's money, he pretended not to know and they left empty-handed. Yolande and Tessier were removed from Saint-Quentin before Gabou could carry out her preparations for her rescue. Yolande, Tessier and Biela arrived at Avenue Foch, the headquarters of the German Counterintelligence Services, also known as the SD, on January the 18th to undergo more questioning. Biela was warned that he and everyone else involved would be shot unless he cooperated and disclosed the sites of his weapons dumps. Yolande claimed that she had been warned to give up her plans and codes or risk being deported to Germany. Even if Biela did reach a deal of some sort, it was useless. As a result of the problems he had caused his inquisitors, he suffered the harshest treatment from them. Tessier learned that Biela had requested to be shot a week later. In September 1944, he was sent to the Flossenburg concentration camp and executed. There is proof that the SD used Yolande's equipment to successfully transmit fake wireless communications to London as late as April 1944. As a result, 3 British agents were directly parachuted into enemy hands around that time. Yolande was sent to Fresnay jail following her questioning. On May the 12th, she and 7 additional SOE agents, which included Eliane Plumen and Odette Sansom, were sent by train to a prison in Karlsruhe, which is located just inside the German border. Yolande was able to divert herself with art and embroidery despite the possibility of being executed or dying from Allied bombing, which apparently was beginning to worry her more and more. Due to a lack of writing or drawing materials, she managed to draw her cell on toilet paper using ink made from her own blood. Yolande, Dammermont and Plumen were given their belongings back early on September the 12th and put on the early train to Munich. Noor Inayat Khan, a wireless operator who had trained with Yolande at Tain Park, joined them on their journey. They were apparently relieved to be reunited. They travelled together in an ordinary carriage and it was late before they arrived at their destination, when they then changed and joined a local train to Dachau. They arrived late that night at the camp. Opening on March the 22nd, 1933, Dachau was the first concentration camp established by Nazi Germany. The camp was initially meant to house communists, social democrats and other dissidents who were among Hitler's political adversaries. It is situated on the grounds of a disused munitions plant 16 kilometres northwest of Munich, in the southern German state of Bavaria, northeast of the medieval town of Dachau. Following Heinrich Himmler's inauguration of the camp, its goals were expanded to include forced labour, followed by the imprisonment of Austrian and German criminals, Romanis, Jews and eventually nationals from foreign countries that Germany had annexed. At dawn the next morning, all 4 women wept as they were informed of their death sentence. Apparently, a request to see a priest was made, but this was refused by the camp commandant, Wilhelm Rupert, as a priest was not present in the camp. Incidentally, Rupert was himself hanged for war crimes in 1946. Though the circumstances leading to their actual killings are still unknown, one version of events, now discredited, said that 2 SS guards shot them in pairs as they knelt down holding hands. However, Lieutenant Colonel H.J. Wiki, who was a former Canadian intelligence officer, eventually managed to obtain a more credible narrative after speaking with a member of the camp personnel. Wiki was informed that Inayat Khan was severely assaulted and shot separately, and that all 4 captives had been treated quite roughly prior to their death. Yolanda's body was then cremated and her ashes were scattered in the courtyard of the camp. A plaque was erected in the crematorium commemorating Yolande and the 3 other SOE women. The plaque's inscription reads, "Here in Dachau on the 12th of September 1944, 4 young women officers of the British forces attached to Special Operations Executive were brutally murdered and their bodies cremated. They died as gallantly as they served the resistance in France during the common struggle for freedom from tyranny. Mrs. Yolande Beekman, Miss Madeleine Dammermont, Miss Noor Inayat Khan and Mrs. Eliane Plumen." The inscription ends by saying that the souls of the righteous are in the hand of God and there no torments shall touch them. In 1946, Yolande Beekman was mentioned in dispatches. Additionally, the French government awarded her with a posthumous Croix de Guerre. A plaque honours her death at Dachau, and her name is also listed here at the Air Force Memorial at Runnymede and the memorial to SOE's F section at Valençay in central France. Here at Runnymede, the Air Force has used her family name of Unternährer. Now, the role of women in the Special Operations Executive was vital to the organisation's success. Many women served as agents and played important roles in conducting espionage, sabotage and reconnaissance missions in occupied Europe. They also played crucial support roles in the organisation, such as working as radio operators to communicate with agents in the field and training agents in the skills they needed to carry out their missions. Women in the SOE often faced great danger and many were captured and executed by the enemy. Despite these risks, their contributions were essential to the success of the organisation and helped pave the way for greater participation by women in military and intelligence operations. Churchill was SOE's greatest supporter, but this then changed after his defeat in the July 1945 general election. Additionally, SIS and others in Whitehall, who desired control over British intelligence services and operations, redoubled their objections to the SOE's existence. In January 1946, SOE was dissolved. Most of its training and research personnel were subsequently rehired by the SIS. Well, I do hope that you enjoyed this look at the life of the incredibly brave Yolande Beekman, her story being just one of the 20,456 names carved in stone here. If you have liked this video, then please could I ask you to hit the like button and also subscribe if you would like to see more content such as this. Many thanks for watching and bye for now.